program, and it didn't last very long, but during that time I introduced this bill, and I took it to the floor of the United States Senate, where I was opposed, in fact filibustered, by none other than Joe Biden. Now I had, at the time, 60 co-sponsors of my bill, which is enough to usually overcome any objection in the United States Senate, including many, more than a dozen Democrats. When I brought the bill to the floor, though, it was opposed, unfortunately, by the administration. And it was also opposed by Joe Biden, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama. All four of them voted no, and we lost by 4 votes. So I share that with you, that we tried to pass a very strong, much stronger than we eventually did pass that act, but it was narrow, it was skinny down to existing sanctions, no additional sanctions. So it was good to codify the sanctions we had in place, and it was good to provide $75 million for aid to the pro-democracy movement. Unfortunately, while President Bush used that money, none of that money went into Iraq. It all went to outside organizations, many of whom were not particularly effective. And when President Obama came into office, he cut the money completely. So there was no effort to try to support any type of revolution. In fact, I was told in 05 and 06 and 07 that there was no opposition, organized opposition in Iran, and that a revolution was impossible. That's what I was told by our intelligence community. And of course, as you know, the 2009 Green Revolution occurred, caught everybody, including our intelligence community and the president off guard, and the president did nothing. Absolutely nothing to support that movement, to try to take out a government which was killing Americans by manufacturing improvised explosive devices, had attacked America, whether it's the USS Cole or Beirut or other places, and we did nothing. So that's a little bit of the background on me. I've been involved really since that time, traveling the country, talking about the threat of a nuclear Iran. When I ran for re-election unsuccessfully in 2006, one of the major planks of my campaign, which was probably not the smart thing, I gave a series of speeches called The Gathering Storm of the 21st Century. And at the head of that, again, and this was 05 and 06, I talked about the threat of a nuclear Iran. When I remember being asked, I was on Meet the Press with my opponent, and we did a debate in September of 06. Tim Russert asked me, what is the most important national security threat confronting this country? Remember, we were in the middle of the Iraq War. At the time we were losing. This was right prior to the surge. And I said, Iran, and Russert stopped me. He said, I'm sorry, sir, let me correct you. You mean Iraq? And I said, no, I mean Iran. I said, Iran is the greater threat than secular powers in the Muslim world. Radical Islamic threats are much more dangerous than the traditional pan-Arab threats that we have experienced prior to the rise of radical Islam. So that's my background, but I want to share with you something I think is also important. Why is it that Democrats and Republicans, up until this most recent debate, why is it that they have been uniformly together, in fact vehemently so, in opposing Iran getting a nuclear weapon? As you know, I mean, this is, there are other countries out there that have nuclear weapons or attain nuclear weapons, but there wasn't this sense of cohesion that we see around the Iranian issue, that Democrats and Republicans share that Iran should not get a nuclear weapon. And of course, even those who are in favor of this Iran deal say they're in favor of it because they believe it is the best chance to keep Iran from a nuclear weapon. So it's not like anybody is out there saying, oh, we want Iran to get a nuclear weapon, or we don't see a problem in Iran getting a nuclear weapon. That is unusual. But I don't think most Americans take the time to think, well, why is it that they feel this way? And the reason is because most members of Congress know what most Americans don't know, which is they have some rudimentary understanding of the theology of the leaders of Iran. They have an understanding of what motivates this cult called, and I call it a cult because it is a version of radical Shia Islam that never existed up until the late 1970s. And so it is very much an offshoot of Shia Islam, is what we see present in Iran today. And it is not one that we can go back and look at history and draw any type of conclusion, good or bad, as to how this particular sect will operate. We only need to look at what they say and then determine whether we're going to believe what they say or not. So let me explain, and the reason I think this is important is because if you don't know what motivates the enemy, what is the reason that they exist, what's their end, what's their goal, and why they have this goal, then it's very difficult to be able to concoct a strategy to defeat them. It's like playing a football game. If you don't know what the offense is going to do, it's hard to structure the defense to contend from the pass or the run or whatever they're doing. If you're completely clueless as to what they're doing, you're very much incapable of defending against what they're going to do, because you don't know to anticipate it. After the events of 9/11, I realized that the President of the United States was not telling me the whole truth, that we were not at war with terrorism. This was not a war on terror any more than World War II was a war on surprise attack. Terrorism, a tactic used by the enemy. It is not who the enemy is. It says nothing about what they believe or what they want to accomplish. So I've, obviously, and all of us realized, if we thought through it, this was a war against a group of radical Muslims who had a theology which I knew nothing about. Most Americans know nothing about Islam. We have a very small percentage in this country who are Muslims, and it's by and large a foreign religion to the United States of America. And so we have a country that is ignorant of the nature of our enemy. That's certainly not true if you're from the Middle East or other parts of the world, but it is true if you live here in America. So I took it upon myself to read as much as I can and understand what the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite was. I asked that question, I did for years, because I lectured about this for years all over the country, colleges as well as other places. And I would ask the question, how many can tell the difference? Tell me the difference. And 99% had no idea what the difference is, and more importantly, why it mattered. Iran is a very unique, as I mentioned, unique country because Shia Islam historically has not been the aggressive form of Islam. The aggressive form of Islam, the form of Islam that established the caliphate, spread Islam throughout the world, was Sunni Islam. They did and fought the Western world for over 1,000 years, successfully spreading Islam into North Africa and to Europe, and in fact even to the central part of Europe. And of course out into Asia and into Africa. Shia Islam, as you know, there's only a few countries in the world that are a majority of Muslims are Shia Muslims. And two of them are Iran and Iraq. It's a very centrally, Syria is another one. These are areas that are very, very concentrated. Why? Because this was not they were the form of Islam that was dominated by the Sunnis. You can go back and you can talk about, well, the difference between the two, for those very quick, the Sunni Islam, Sunni means the party of the people, the People's Party. In other words, when Muhammad died, they had a decision. Who's next? Who's going to lead this religious movement? And a group of people, his advisors, said, well, it's going to be, the people, the folks who around him are going to decide. And so it'll be sort of democratic. That's where you come up with Sunni. And there were others who said, no, it has to be a relative, a descendant of the Prophet. And that's where you come up with Shiat Ali, which means the party of Ali, who was the sole male heir. And so those how the two divided. And to understand where why, and I know you said, why are you going back in this history? Because it's important to understand who these people are. The Shias were a minority. The Sunnis were the one who had the power because it was the leaders of the tribes, if you will, who were the ones who elected. So they had the resources, the power, and the ability to communicate effectively with the people. Long story short, over a period of decades, the Sunnis would kill the next leader of Shia Islam. Whether it was eventually it was Ali, and then it was a son, and then it was a brother of the son, and on down the line until we got through 11 leaders. 11 leaders of Shia Islam. 11 in the line of the Prophet. And the last one, according to most histories that you read, at least in the Iranian texts, was captured by the Sunnis, detained for a period of time long enough they were convinced that he no longer had any surviving heirs, and then they killed him to end the line of leaders. But according to Iranian lore, or faith, I shouldn't say lore, that's disrespectful. According to the Iranian faith, Shia faith, they believe there was in fact another leader who was but a little boy who showed up at the funeral of this 11th leader, declared that he was the next leader, or as they referred to him, he was the 12th Imam. I don't know if you ever heard the term 12th Imam. Raise your hand if you've heard of the 12th Imam. That's good. Maybe a third of the crowd. That's good. So the 12th Imam appears. And he is whisked away so the Sunnis do not get at him. And he hides. He hides in a well outside of Tehran, in the town of Qom. And he governs from Qom, from this well, for many, many decades, through interlocutors. After a period of time, the interlocutors will start to die. The last one is alive, and he announces that this Imam who's living in this well is going to disappear. It's called the Great Occultation. You can read about it. He disappears, and he announces that he is coming back. He is coming back at the end of times. He will reappear, and he will lead Shia Islam to its final victory. Now, what happens is he goes into this great occultation, which is where he is today. He's, according to the Shia Muslims in Iran, he is everywhere. He is present. He's just not in human form, but he's there and he's influencing things. And if you have any doubts about that, I encourage you to read the speeches of the mullahs. Read the speeches of Rouhani. Read the speeches of Ahmadinejad before him. Read how often the 12th Imam is mentioned. The Mahdi. Anybody hear the term Mahdi? Same character. Read how much they talk about him, and they talk about his return and predict his return. Now, they don't do surveys in Iran, but they do in Iraq and in the Shia areas of Iraq. A poll was asked this question recently, and the question was, when do you believe the end of the world is coming? And a majority of Iraqi Shias believe within the next 5 years that the Mahdi is coming back. I don't know if you know, but during the the presidency of Ahmadinejad, they did a major highway construction project between Qom, which is outside of Tehran, and the central square of Tehran. A beautiful, wide boulevard, very well decorated, very ornate, made for a king, or for a Mahdi. And it was built between the Jam Quran well, which is a holy site in the Shia Islamic religion. In fact, not just the mullahs, residents go and pray and drop messages to him, ask for his help. And they built this tens of millions of dollars of highway and sort of parade route, if you will, between the well and Tehran. Now you may say, well, this is crazy. Maybe it is, but it isn't if you believe it. What we do know, according to their holy texts, and this is what I say all the time, if you want to know about the enemy, read their books. Listen to their speeches. How many times have we had leaders in this world who say they're going to do all of these horrible things, and we just laugh and say, oh, the guy's just crazy. God doesn't really mean it. He's just using this to control his people. He's just using this to gain political power. When the reality is, if there's anything we've learned from history, believe what tyrants say they're going to do. And all you have to do is to read their books. What they believe is that this Mahdi will return at the time of Armageddon, the end of times. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a regime we have just given a pathway to a nuclear weapon. So when you say, why is it that members of Congress and others who are in the know are so worried about Iran, is because they know what I just told you. But the problem is, you don't know that. America doesn't know this. Because we have political leaders who simply refuse to share that information. Because, well, it sounds fanatically religious. It sounds offensive to Muslims. It sounds as if you're being dismissive or overstating the role of religion that plays. Listen to their leaders and what they're saying. It's time in America that we have a leader who's willing to lead the American people in truth about the nature of our enemy. These people, I have no doubt, focus more, and you, again, read their speeches, focus more on the hereafter than the here and now. We treat these leaders as if they're interested in temporal political power. They are not. They are not. They are religious leaders who have taken a form of Islam, Shia Islam, which has been termed in the past as the quietist part of Islam. They are not the ones who have been conducting the wars and spreading Islam. They are the ones who have been suppressed by Sunni Islam, been treated as a sort of a minority within the Islamic world. And they have waited up until the Ayatollah Khomeini. Shia Islam believed that their obligation was to wait, that the Mahdi would come back, and that's the time that Shia Islam would rise and take over during this great time of strife. And they would just wait for that to happen, because it's going to happen at some point. We don't know when. We have to be ready. And when the time comes, the Mahdi will come back, and that'll be our turn. Khomeini, taking a page out of the Muslim Brotherhood, said, we're not waiting around anymore. I'm tired of Shias being sort of the backwater, and we have an opportunity to rise and take control of a country that has the resources to be able to do something about this. And we have a country that is rich and powerful. What we have to do, according to them, was we had to be more pure in our faith. This is where Shia Islam blends with the Muslim Brotherhood and radical Shia Sunni Islam. Radical Sunni Islam has come about, this 7th century view of Islam, really just in the last 100 years. Because, again, Sunni Islam went through this great period of success and expansion. There were times when it looked like Islam was going to, in fact, conquer the West and take over the world. But they failed. In fact, not only did they fail, but they were driven back. All of their expansion, by and large, was rescinded out of Europe for sure. And they were conquered and colonized. This is a religion, the Sunni faith, that was a dominant on the aggressive march for 1,000 years. And they were defeated and colonized. And they sat and wondered, what happened? How did we lose? How is it that we were promised that this was the final revelation and we were going to conquer the world and we were on the path to do so and we failed? What did we do wrong? And this is where the Muslim Brotherhood and others come along, like the Wahhabis. They come along and they say, well, look at, this was about 100 years ago, a little less. Look at the one country that's being blessed. The one country that's being blessed with power and wealth. And who was that? Saudi Arabia, because they had oil. And what were the Saudis? They were Wahhabis. One of the most virulent, I hate to use the term conservative, I mean, they were the most strict adherents to 7th century Islam. And so others start to write, well, Allah is blessing them, we must follow them. And thus the doctrine of the Muslim Brotherhood comes about, as well as the same lessons that Ayatollah Khomeini learned and grafted it on to Shia Islam. So you grafted this geopolitical Islam, which was Sunni Islam for a long time, that grafted onto this 7th century version of Islam, which in a sense is a threat. The Sunnis want to take over the world, that's a threat. But you've now grafted this radical form of Islam to an apocalyptic version of Islam. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why Iran is the greater threat. Because Iran is all about the death cult. I call them a death cult. They're all about conquering the world and ending the world for the time in which their Savior can return. And so I lay that out to you because, well, probably no one else is going to come here and speak about this. But it's important for you to understand why people in Israel are so upset. I guarantee you a lot more people there know about this than people here. They understand these radicals. Let me assure you, the Saudis understand this. The Turks understand this. It's not just, well, it's Sunni, Shia, we don't like the Sunnis. No. They know what these people are capable of. And so I share that with you, that in the context of that, for the President of the United States, who fully well knows, he may not accept, but knows everything I've just told you, for him to sign an agreement that puts Iran on a path, even if they comply, on a path to a nuclear weapon, is a betrayal of the highest order for this country. So I have opposed this deal from the beginning. It is worse than I could have possibly imagined. There is nothing, in my opinion, to commend this agreement, principally because there's nothing that would convince me that Iran has any intention of keeping any element of this agreement. They have not kept any agreement that they have ever entered into. Why would they keep this one? And as I said, even if they do, we have strengthened Iran immeasurably already. Already we see embassies now reopening in Iran. We see the Chinese and the Russians and corporations all over the world negotiating deals. You hear about the bazaar that are the hotels in Tehran right now, full of Westerners trying to make their deals to get it to the oil markets and gas markets. It's already happening. The lion is out of the cage. The wealth is starting to be generated. And there's no way to put this genie back in the bottle. Certainly not this agreement that was put in place by the United States Senate to potentially withhold certain U.S. sanctions. The President has already moved forward on opening up UN sanctions, getting rid of UN sanctions. The President is always encouraging others to move forward and treat as if this agreement is going to be in place. And of course, he has now put himself in a position where it put Democrats in a position that if they oppose this, they're actually betraying him, and that America will be worse off because we will have reneged on the deal and Iran will be able to go and do what they want, free of any sanctions maybe other than the ones that the United States would keep in place. So the president has negotiated a deal which has given Iran everything they wanted and more, has not accomplished anything that he set out at the beginning of the negotiations. If you look at the things that he set out that were his benchmarks at the beginning of negotiations, none of them have been accomplished. None. None. And yet, not only did we give in on every one of them, we gave in on things that they didn't even want to negotiate at the beginning, which is the removal of the arms embargo and the release of prisoners. It was as if Kerry was sitting there saying, I have to have a deal, time is running out. What else do you need? That's what it was like. It's just whatever you want. I just have to have this deal. And so we are in a position that we have greatly empowered this death cult in Iran to have a weapon that can spark what they believe is potentially the end of times. And of course, what better way to do that than trying to wipe out the state of Israel? So we are now in the unenviable position of watching this deal go into place, no matter what we do. Because the Congress didn't have the confidence in themselves to not pass some sort of side deal with the president that allows them some authority to review it. But they didn't trust themselves enough that they could go to the American public, as I'm doing here tonight, and convince the American public to demand that the president submit this as a treaty. Only one United States senator voted against this agreement. One. Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Everybody else, while they complained about it, and some even offered amendments on it, ultimately capitulated because they didn't believe in you. They didn't believe in the American public, and they didn't believe in themselves. They didn't believe in their ability to be able to go out and make the case that this agreement was a threat to the security of our country in a major way that required the United States Senate to have the right to approve it as a treaty. And so I know a lot of people, I hear this all the time as I travel around in Republican circles and talk to people, and the frustration level is through the roof. Thus, DTs arrive on the scene. That would be Donald Trump. The frustration level is high. They're tired of a Washington, D.C. that won't fight for the things that they believe in. And they capitulate, and unfortunately, America is vulnerable as a result. So I'll be happy to stop at this point. I'll be happy to take your questions on the treaty or anything else that is on your mind. Yes, sir.